Ready to explore the extraordinary world of tech? Welcome to the XTech podcast, where we connect you with the sharpest minds and leading voices in the global tech community. Join us as we cut through the complexity to give you a clear picture of the ideas, innovations, and insight that are shaping our future.
Hello and welcome to XTech Podcast by Fox Agency. I'm your host, Debbie Forster MBE. I'm a tech portfolio consultant and an advocate and campaigner for diversity, inclusion, and innovation in the tech industry. I'm delighted to be working with Fox Agency as the host for the XTech podcast and as a curator for the XTech community. Now today we have a good one. I'm delighted that we are joined by Marcos Colón. He is the Director of Content and Brand at Immuta. Welcome, Marcos.
Thanks so much for having me.
Right. Now, I love to get to know people as humans before I explore the world of tech with them. So how did you find yourself in the world of tech? You know, if you're like me, I accidentally woke up and found myself here. Other people are born with the keyboard in hand, tapping away. How about you?
Actually, pen and paper was involved a lot more than keyboard since I started my days in print journalism. But I actually began my career in music and entertainment. I was always inspired by long form storytelling. A huge Rolling Stone fan from back in the day. I'm a big music fan, right? So the long form storytelling from Rolling Stone back in the late 90s, early 2000s was what really hooked me in and got me interested in journalism. So that's really where I started straight out of college, working for a company called Track Entertainment. There was a website I worked for called cooljunkie.com. Like, what a great name, right? Yeah, I got the opportunity to really leverage that to talk to some of the bands that I loved and a lot of really great DJs at the time. And that sort of evolved, and I ended up in New York City. And I think there came a point in time where I kind of wanted to write about something a little bit more impactful. I still have a really strong passion and love for music and entertainment, definitely more so music. But honestly, at the time, this is when Apple was really sort of, the iPad was just released. There was a lot of activity around app development. So I thought it was really cool and interesting. And there's a lot of innovation there.
Apple made tech cool, didn't it?
It made
Apologies
tech cool
to all the other tech manufacturers out there, but let's be honest. Apple made it cool.
It made it cool. I was already into cool stuff, or at least I thought I was. So that sort of piqued my interest. And honestly, on a whim, I decided to apply for this digital content coordinator role. Now, what is that, Debbie? Like, what does that mean, right?
That's not a lot of pen and paper, I don't think, Marcus.
Exactly, right. So thankfully, I was given an opportunity by, the great leaders at SC Magazine at the time, which are, known as SC Media now,
Nice.
Run by Cyber Risk Alliance. And, thankfully, shout out to Tony Keefe and Dan Kaplan and Eileen Armstrong for giving me an opportunity to say, hey, he's got a printed portfolio. Let's give him a shot. And really, that's how I got started in the world of tech, cybersecurity. At the time, my first full week was at the RSA conference. Can you imagine that? I couldn't even
That's
grasp.
jumping off the cliff quickly, isn't it, really? And hope you fly.
I didn't even know what malware meant. I would think virus, right? So I still remember there was a moment for me, covering the keynote speech at the RSA conference, and the director of the FBI at the time, Bob Mueller, right? Back then, we probably wasn't much of a name. Fast forward, became a little bit more, recognizable for folks. But I remember him saying, everybody in this room is going to have a job for a really long time. And I didn't get it at the time, but fast forward to today, makes complete sense, right? Like, cybersecurity is everywhere. Technology is everywhere. It continues to evolve. And, I feel really lucky and blessed that it's been a hell of a journey since. So at the time, it was really about telling, these journalistic, editorially grounded stories. And really, I didn't really leave storytelling at all. I feel like it just shifted from, bands to breaches at the moment, right? But a lot of what I learned at the time still applies to, what I do today, which is kind of, what a lot of journalists would say is like, you went to the dark side, right? Content marketing for B2B, right? So, yeah.
From rock and roll to the dark side. But, you've seen so much change, because I'm even thinking about when you were starting, cyber was this other thing. I mean, I remember cyber was things that happened in films when they wanted to make something exciting happening in tech. And then cyber was the thing that the guys over there dealt with, and it was usually guys. It's now everywhere, isn't it? It's on everybody's desk. It's on everybody's mind in that piece. And through that marketing, you used to be able to carry around your portfolio, and that it's digital content, and marketing keeps challenging. With all that's changing, what do you think are the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
That's a good question. So, I don't like to see them as challenges, really. It's more so they're two sort of key inflection points, right? And so first we'll talk about, there's this aspect of volume. So the hardest part isn't creating content. It's really clarity, right? I think organizations, especially like in earlier stages, always have a volume problem. Do we have enough, right? Are we saying enough? Sales is certainly going to be in your ear. So if any content marketers are listening to this right now, they can certainly, we're on the same wavelength there. But, the shift I'm seeing isn't about creating more content. It's about really the narrative alignment in a changing market, right? And if you're in tech, it's constantly evolving, right? Technology evolves. Categories evolve, right? If you stay tuned with all the analysts, the Gartners, the Forresters, and then that means that the problems that your audience faces, they evolve too, right? So as a former journalist, I feel like I do more editing and revising, not only internal documents and narratives, but externally facing content too. So you have to have that editor hat on all the time. So you're in this constant state of subtle adjustment, right? All the time. And you're not only learning and refining your story, you're learning publicly as well from everything that's occurring, from trends, from the news. And you have to make sure that your content reflects that all the time, right? So I feel like that means that your messaging is again, the first point is that means your messaging has to evolve and with precision. Right. You have to have the fine-tuned ear to what's occurring in the space and also be forward thinking about things. So you're not being reactive all the time, because that's, you don't want to glom on to, the latest headline, because that's only going to last 1 to 2 days. So again, it's not a problem of volume. It's really clarity. And the visible work that you do as a content marketer is content creation. I think the real high leverage work is more so, and I'll talk about this, later as well, but it's more so structural, right? Building your narrative consistency, content systems that you implement. And those two things aren't going to happen if you don't have internal alignment, right? Do you have a seat at the proverbial table with upstream management? Or do they agree with the narrative you have in place? And only then can you really implement A, your system, and B, the consistency that you want to sort of amplify through all your channels, right? So I think, like I said, the real work is building the system that makes a good content, repeatable and scalable. And then, the second piece, and this is a tough one, is, we're operating today in platforms that are really optimized by fast reactions, right? Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, oh my God. But the problem is, as a B2B marketer, we're influencing decisions that require kind of slow, deliberate thinking, right? Closing that gap, I feel like, is a monumental challenge that we face on a daily basis. And
I think what I'm hearing that I think is really valuable is it's stepping back from the noise and definitely making sure you're not part of the noise. Say more, say it louder, say it more times. It's that listening, and I like that refining and cutting down and thinking and being clear what you're saying, not just chasing the latest algorithm, the latest headline, the latest hashtag. I want to come back to that because I think the marketing piece is such a fast moving one. Before I let you out of my clutches, I want to come back to that. But you're also completely looking at, security and what I realized looking through your bio, you covered that Target breach as a journalist in 2014. Okay, that feels like a lot more than 11. Yeah, when I did the numbers, because it's like, that's 2014. Okay, so that's not very long. Fast forward to 2026. Are we better at security or are we better at PR? Now that you've gone to the dark side, tell me honestly, just between you and me, no one else has to know what's going on.
No, honestly, it's both. I feel like security's, obviously matured, right? There have been incredible technological advancements, and there's innovation taking place both with large and small companies, although we're seeing a lot of acquisitions. So, but at the same time, the threat landscape has evolved. I'm sure that's a phrase you hear constantly in stories, the constant evolving threat landscape, right? But like I said, security technology and detection capabilities have improved significantly. I think platforms are a lot more mature. But also response playbooks, right? That's where it really comes in, are a lot more defined, right? So while, and I always think about a subject matter expert that I worked with at my last company at Bitdefender, who's, a great researcher. And he would always say, like, these attacks really, they're not like net new, right? Sure, there are more and they're faster, but if you really, really look at it, and they're obviously, being enhanced by, generative AI now, right? So, but they're really not new. I think one of the biggest improvements that I think I've seen is it's beyond the technical. And I think it's really the organizational readiness, right? I think now it's pretty commonly understood that, disaster can strike at any moment, that while you may be in complete lockdown as an organization, there may be a third party you're doing business with that isn't there, right? So it's really that organizational ready piece that I think has evolved quite a bit. And that includes, things like response planning, cross-functional coordination, and internal comms discipline. I was really blessed to be with a great internal comms team at my last company at Bitdefender, and really got to see like how important that aspect, that department, that function is. And like I said, I think companies now understand that incidents aren't hypothetical. And that's how you communicate, internally and externally in the first 24, 48 hours matters just as much as that technical containment, right? We tend to hear more about that than sort of the response and readiness. So there's always an aspect of spin, right, that's involved when it comes to that from a comm standpoint. But I really think it's less about spin and more about operational composure and how that's really kind of improved over the years.
I love that, the composure, because that is part of that readiness is getting everything ready, as you said, on the internal comms, but also then how you're going to communicate that. And that's a beautiful idea of this isn't about spin. It's how to keep it together, be professional, and show that professional part.
We're a lot better at responding, whereas before it was a lot about reacting, right? So that response aspect is definitely a lot better.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, then let's think about how you market security. What's the biggest gap, in your opinion, of how it's marketed and how it actually works?
So I think if you're in B2B tech, I think it's pretty common that marketing tends to oversimplify what the technical department or operations is complex, right? So I think it's gotten better, but I think there's still an issue when it comes to a gap being between sort of fear and function, right? So how some companies still leverage FUD, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt in a lot of their marketing, right? There's still too much. I feel like I said, it's gotten better, but there's an over reliance on fear-driven narratives. The sort of, and I'm sure you can remember, just thinking back to like even like the Target breach days, but talking about the worst case scenarios, talking about and this applies again. This is beyond. I'm in the data access governance space right now. This goes beyond security. I think it's whenever you're speaking to kind of that C-level professional, it's always like, what's the worst case scenario, right? What's the breach headline? What's keeping you up at night, right? Like how many ebooks have you seen when it comes to that? But most practitioners and these audiences, they don't need to be convinced that risks exist. They live it. They're in it every day, right?
It's their day job. It is their bread and butter. They
exactly.
know that.
Right. They're already accountable for it, right? And like I said, they live it every day. But like the real work of, be it a CISO or, a chief data officer, honestly, in my opinion, I don't think it's dramatic. It's operational, right? It's policy tuning, it's access reviews, it's, security hygiene, it's constant adjustment, right? As their environments change, as their tools change. So I think sometimes marketing often presents protection as a destination. And in reality, it's an ongoing process that's shaped by context, right? Who's accessing what, why, under what conditions. So I think the gap exists in traditional cybersecurity and in data governance. In both cases, it really isn't about completely eliminating risk. It's about how you can kind of measurably reduce it. And I think you're starting to see companies do a lot better of a job of kind of backing away from that fear, uncertainty, doubt, and really just focusing in on, okay, how can we help our audience? What are the questions that they have? Like, how can I help them immediately with any content that I create today? And I think that's one, for me, a huge foundational aspect is I don't work on any content or any content-driven initiative if it's not inherently answering a question that's going to help our audience from day one. Even if it's a small takeaway, there should always be a question that you're aiming to answer, because that's how you start building trust.
And I think it is. It's understanding, as you were saying, the sector is growing up. It has that composure. It doesn't need to be scared of what might happen. It knows that. It's built that in. It's done that. It's meeting them at that level and solving the problems. That's where the really impactful marketing can be, because that's where your best clients are going to be and your best sales relationships are going to happen.
Yeah, fear always gets attention, right? It's always going to get attention, but I think operational, like communicating that operational clarity through storytelling, I feel like that's really what's going to earn trust.
Okay. Then, as somebody who's been in this space, cybersecurity and media, for 10 plus years, in your opinion, what threat did we overreact to, and what did we miss? Oh gosh, I don't think there are going to be a lot of opinions on this. I'm going to I feel like, I wouldn't call it overreaction, right? Because there are a lot of variables at play here. First of all, all threats are very much real, right? I think it's a matter of visibility. And when you, and I'll tell you why, because when you lack visibility, everything kind of feels like an emergency, right? So let's think back to some of the, I guess more, again, kind of, I've been in this space for a long time, and now I'm tangentially in this space. I'm still very much, attuned to what's occurring, but like, think about events like SolarWinds, Log4j, large scale ransomware attacks. All of them deserved a lot of attention, and they all certainly had technical implications that were serious, right? Now, did they carry the same weight for every organization across the board? Probably not, right? So what happened though was with stories like that is, you get this universal amplification. And at the time, no matter the size of the company or organization, they felt the pressure to respond immediately, right? Even when the actual exposure, like I said, could vary significantly. Yeah. So the deeper issue really wasn't panic. It was visibility, right? So a lot of these companies didn't have a clear inventory of assets, identities or data flow. So when we don't know exactly what's going on or what's exposed or who has access, the safest move is to kind of treat everything as important, right? Critical. Everything's a crown jewel all of a sudden. So I think that's where, that lack of clarity forces a sort of reactive behavior instead of a response that's a little bit more prioritized. But even then, like to what we discussed a little bit earlier, I think it's situations like that, it's threats that a lot of these companies are learning from and adapting to, because, hey, this could totally happen again. So, absolutely. I don't know if it's what we missed I don't think we missed a specific threat. I think it's kind of the importance of sort of visibility and the context before like this next big headline hits, because it's going to happen again. And I think it's also, I think what you were saying was really interesting. However much we might say, oh, that's over-egged, for someone it was that serious. But also that importance has that trickle-down effect, that awareness, as you said, of visibility that goes down through the supply chain, that goes, and, we're only as strong as this weakest link in our supply chain. We're only as strong as our weakest user. And so sometimes those really scary stories are useful in terms of that teaching, the learning, what do we do? If not for the grace of God, there go I, sort of mindset that we need to make sure everyone keeps on top of. Yeah, exactly. Okay, but I want to go back to content because I think you've got some interesting ideas. When I was looking into the work that you've done, etc., I saw somebody talked about you're famous for having a camera in one hand and a content plan in the other at conferences. Now, that's a really interesting approach because conferences, it's a bit like what we would say over in the UK is Marmite. You love it or hate it. But you're coming at it from a different angle. Talk to me about what's driving that approach.
I mean, this is an aspect of my job that I genuinely love. Now, I'm by no means a professional photographer or videographer or anything. It's just, I don't like just writing or telling stories. I like to capture them. And I'm always of the mindset that, if you're already in the room with a story, I think it makes sense to capture it. Right. Physical, I feel like a lot of times that physical involvement tends to create authenticity. So, and again, live moments, and I'm not like a TV report, this isn't live, but I feel like, when we're talking about conferences, right, be it like an RSA or Black Hat or anything like that, a big Snowflake or Databricks summit, I think live moments tend to produce high trust content.
There you
right?
go.
That's why video is so infectious, right? If you think about, I'm pretty sure it's a LinkedIn stat, but the report they did, but video receives 5 times more engagement than any other content format. Is that surprising? Absolutely not, right? So you really have to sort of meet audiences where they consume that information. And for me, I love being able to do it myself. In certain organizations, I've had the luxury of having a team and I've worked with some really talented videographers and video editors. But a lot of times, hey, I like to, not only I roll up my sleeves. I like to do it myself. I'm more of behind the camera, although I'm sure you can find some stuff with me in front of the camera on YouTube. I looked a little bit younger, but it's something that I really enjoy. And I think, there's also, speaking about, thinking about trade shows specifically, but there's a difference between sort of the staged content and then kind of contextual content. And I think audiences can feel that when you finally end up running it. When someone's speaking from the environment that they actually operate in. And again, I'm talking about, not an actual SOC or even a SOC, because we've done some filming in SOCs, especially my previous company, but the insight feels a little bit more grounded, right?
And I think that's the edge. And, you said it first, I'm not a professional photographer. That's not a liability because again, that slightly rough edge, you're not going to know what you're doing, but that slightly rough edge gives that immediacy, gives that sense, it grounds it in a reality that we do intrinsically trust more. So if that's true, and if we get 5 times more engagement in video than writing, does that mean the written content's dead? I can throw that out of my tool bag?
No, definitely not. I mean, it's certainly right now I would say no. But I will say that format discipline matters now more than ever, right? Written content, especially long form, it does 3 things for you, right? It builds depth, authority, and long-term credibility, right? And if you put all those together, that's trust, right? So written content, that's where nuance lives. That's what makes brands searchable, referenceable. It supports that slower, more deliberate, evaluation from the audience that requires, right? I think, for anybody listening and who's a B2B content marketer, your sales cycle's probably pretty long, right? So you need to start building that trust. Now, video, right? Granted, we just talked about video. It's 5 times more engaging. So should that mean it makes sense for somebody to be like, we're just going to do video. And some companies, I've seen some great examples where they primarily focus on that, but I can guarantee you they didn't throw written content completely out of the window, right? Video earns attention. I think it humanizes ideas and it lowers the barrier to entry for topics, especially very complex topics, right? Yeah. Depending on what field you're in. But, that's why I think written content isn't going anywhere. I think it's also really important to consider your format. So whenever I focus on written content, you have to consider how people are consuming that content, right? So I always consider the 3 different classifications of these readers, right? The the walkers, the joggers, and the runners.
Oh,
That's sort of the framework that I always keep in the back of my mind when working on content, right? You have your walkers that will read the headline all the way to the CTA after the last sentence of the article, right? Your joggers that may a little bit, they might focus a little bit more on the subheads and the different sections and kind of find something that interests them the most. And then you have, your runners, right? If you have chapters in a video, and this applies to video too, if you have chapters in a video, they might skip to the chapter that they're most interested in based off of the soundbite that they saw on Instagram or LinkedIn, right? If you're writing a listicle that's on a long form piece of content, they might skip to number 1. If it's an inverted pyramid style of writing, they're probably not going to get past the second or third graph, right? So if you keep that in the back of your mind, I think it's going to make your content a lot more engaging and also appeal to those different types of content consumers.
And so are you already building video content for those 3 different audiences? Because I would say I'm already now becoming slightly more jaded, even in my video content. I'm a runner or a jogger. Again, just quick, give me the bits. I'll see you. Is that coming or is it already here?
Yeah, look, so I think I think different for video. It's interesting, right? So depending on what platform you're working with, if you have the ability to leverage chapters, I think that's one way to do it. However, I think it's important that format should reinforce one another, right? And what do I mean by that? If you have a long form demo that might be for a particular point in the journey for a prospect or an audience member, but how do you reinforce that? Well, you could probably take a piece of that and do kind of a trailer style demo to really highlight the major points from said demo that can drive people to a longer piece of content, right? So it doesn't automatically have to be part of it's almost derivative content, right? For you to kind of pull apart a little bit and use to your advantage. So it kind of plays into your sort of volume aspect and also channel, how you're distributing it via the different channels that you're working with. But it's still keeping in mind those walkers, those joggers, those runners.
Fantastic. I'm going to always use that. And I think I'm also going to find myself asking how am I consuming the content that's in front of me? Am I walking? Am I running? Right. Am I jogging? Just to even see, because I think that's a great exercise that everybody should do, because I think you'll start realizing like, oh, okay, now how does this apply to the persona that we're after, right? You always got to go back to that. Who is it that I'm speaking to? Because at the end of the day, we're all consumers, right? Yeah, we're B2B marketers, but at the end of the day, when we're at home, we're consumers. So I think I've always been a big proponent of taking cues from B2C content and applying it to B2B content. And I think if there was a real gap between those 2 different audiences, COVID and lockdown put it together. And we now have to remember a B is made up of C's, and you have to be using that kind of, and they come with the expectations of that consumer. They're not going to be dragged through long documents without guideposts.
A B is made up of C's. I'm going to take that from you and put it in my back pocket for my next
I'm taking the runner, jogger,
meeting.
etc. So we're going to do that. Right. We'll quote each other.
Deal.
All right. Last thing, because I love asking this of people who are in this space. You always talk about being data-driven. What are the metrics that actually matter for B2B content marketing?
I feel like you tend to get a lot of responses mixed responses when it comes to this. And it depends on the company you're in. I think the most important metrics actually start upstream, right? So meaning before you ever look at clicks, conversions, engagement, if your content isn't structured intentionally, I think your metrics won't tell you anything that's actually meaningful, right? You'll see numbers, but what you're not going to see is a story. You're not going to see patterns. That's where I feel really strongly about having a really sound and strict taxonomy and kind of content architecture in place. So when you consistently, and again, we're talking about tags here, right? Yeah. So when you consistently tag content by audience, topic, intent, funnel stage, whatever it may be, then you start implementing that system that allows for like comparison, right? That allows you to start telling a better story. So without that structure in place, I think you're reacting to isolated wins and losses, right? And with structure, that's where it gets fun, right? You can identify themes, gaps, true influence across many different channels. So it's always going to be important to have those foundational vanity metrics in place, right? Reach, engagement, time spent. Those things tell you if something resonated, right? You're always going to have to report on that. That's always going to be in place. But I think those more advanced signals, the depth of consumption, the repeat interaction, some of that assisted influence, right? That's going to help you understand the why. So you need a couple of them together. But before you even get to those kind of vanity metrics, you need to have a sound architecture in place. So, the goal isn't proving that content was published or that numbers moved. You're always going to be asked that, but that shouldn't be your goal as a content marketer. I think it's really understanding what's influencing the buyer behavior, right? And using that insight to shape a smarter strategy moving forward, right?
And I think this is it. And I think on both sides of the desk, because a lot of times in marketing, you're only pushed for those vanity. Or sometimes if we're not in marketing, we can let ourselves be blinded by those. So it's having those smart questions, because in the end, it is data. Data is only valuable from the questions you can ask, the patterns and relationships that you can make. Otherwise, it's just some random numbers. It's how that comes together that is impactful. Okay, now before we let you go, I love to ask my guests to look at the horizon. It might be something that comes right off in your sector, or it might be something different. What's grabbing your attention in a good or a bad way?
I think the notion of short form content definitely has my attention. This goes back to what we discussed earlier is, regarding video and also that gap, right? Like these optimized platforms for quick reactions when we're really speaking to an audience that needs deliberate, thoughtful explanations to make sound decisions. I think as B2B marketers, we need to look at the content consumption behaviors of the up and coming C-suite, right?
Yeah,
I think about these, they might not be at the top of your list to reach out to, right? Because they're not signing the check at the end of the day. But soon enough, it's going to be 5-10 years, and who knows, one of them might skyrocket into the C-suite. Absolutely. And their content consumption behavior is going to be a lot different than folks that are there now. Right. Wow. So thinking about, and they're probably consuming a lot more. I'm thinking about a younger generation that loves their TikTok, that loves Instagram. Hell, I love it too. And
the double screens, looking at everything is not just one screen. You're double screening everything. Yeah,
exactly. Like, how is that going to have an impact on the buyer's journey? How is that going to have an impact on the storytelling that we do as marketers to really influence, build trust, and communicate those complex stories? So that really has my attention right now, because I feel like things are going to evolve pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I think now companies are doing a good job of creating short form content to create awareness. But it's okay. Now, when you have them there, what's going to work next? Because a long form white paper probably isn't going to resonate in the future like it's sort of doing today, but how it definitely did in the past.
Genuinely, I'm going to play with that. That's interesting to think about, because the need for the depth will not go away for the right decisions, for the strategic decisions, etc. But we have to be ready for being able to close that gap in very, very different ways.
Nobody's going to make a 6-figure decision based off of a 30-second clip.
Damn. There goes my strategy for making my million tomorrow. Damn. And then before I let you go, I love to hear from my guests to fill the list of what should I be reading, listening, watching. What are you going to put on my list?
If there's one book you had to buy today or this year, it's Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. I don't know if you're familiar with Rick Rubin. He's a world-renowned music producer. He's done everything.
We're going back to your Rolling Stone aspirations. Yeah, keep telling me.
He's worked with all major artists across genres. And, what's really interesting about Rick Rubin is he did this interview with Anderson Cooper where he basically said, like, he's not proficient in any instrument whatsoever, right? He's just essentially, he said it in a much more grounded and philosophical way, but he basically just has good taste. And he wrote this book called The Creative Act. And the chapters are very short. It's really sort of a creative person's Bible, because you can kind of before bed read a few chapters and it really has you think about your creative process and how you approach things and how you should be present. And read it. Trust me, it's excellent. For anybody that's a content creator, I feel like it's an excellent read that you should definitely have on your bookshelf.
Fantastic. Okay, and we've come full circle from your Rolling Stones, rock and roll, long fiction.
I guess we did.
Yeah, back down to here and in short form. So fantastic journey. I have really, really enjoyed today, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie.
And thank you to all of you for joining us on this episode of XTech. If you'd like to appear as a guest on the show, don't waste a minute. Email us now at xtech@fox.agency. I'd like to thank our whole team of tech experts at Fox Agency for making this podcast possible. I'm Debbie Forster, and you've been listening to XTech.
Keep exploring the world of tech. Subscribe to our podcast and never miss an episode. To discover more opportunities for global B2B tech brands, visit fox.agency today.